about your background and how you came to do the inherent requirements work.
Well, I've been in the disability field for coming up to 3 decades. I've worked in disability and higher education for over 20 years, and I basically have been wanting to have inherent requirements articulated for most of those 20 years, because every day I would encounter the issue of inherent requirements. When you're trying to negotiate reasonable adjustments with academics and they tell you you can't do something, and you drill down and you find that what they're insisting is absolutely essential and not negotiable is actually not essential and quite negotiable and quite adjustable. And the number of arguments, discussions, long to and fro encounters with various academics over many years leads to a lot of frustration, and I think a lot of conflict and bad feeling between academics and disability practitioners that doesn't need to be there, because we're both trying to get the same thing happening. And for 20 years tried to do it. I've written about it. I had discussions when I was managing the disability service at ANU, was fairly close to getting some people working on it in conjunction with the university solicitor there. And particularly when the Disability Standards for Education came out in 2005, where it made inherent requirements an explicit part of the process of determining a reasonable adjustment. So it not only ensures that you get sufficient capacity to adjust for the effects of a disability, but you don't compromise the academic integrity of your assessment and accreditation processes, and we don't qualify people for accreditation in courses where they haven't actually met the fundamental requirements. So the difficulty, if you haven't articulated what your inherent requirements are, is determining whether the person has or has not met them. So I see a dual risk in not having them. One is that you can either exclude or disadvantage students with disabilities who should not be excluded or disadvantaged because they can actually meet the inherent requirements. The other risk is that you actually include students and pass students who shouldn't be included and passed because they can't meet the inherent requirements. So balancing that out was, part of your daily job, but you missed a key component of what the process is. One of your essential factors is missing because nobody had actually articulated what the inherent requirements were. What's compulsory, what we've traditionally done, we know what we'd like to do, but we haven't actually sat down and thought through that process of what is fundamental, essential, inherent to this, so that without that you can't be a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, whatever. I left ANU and went to the University of Western Sydney, and was fortunate to make some connections with the School of Nursing and Midwifery, and we had a particular instance of a student who was very unwell and not safe to go out on a clinical placement, and really the only basis of saying no, you can't go out is to actually articulate what the inherent requirements are and point out where she doesn't meet them. So thanks to Rachel Coe, some of the nursing staff and myself, we managed in a few days to articulate inherent requirements for the clinical placement, and we're able to use that to say to the student, no, you can't go out at this time. When you're well enough, yes you can, but at this time you can't. That led to a conversation with the school disability liaison officer, and she said it'd be great if we had that across our courses. And I said yes, I've been trying to do that for 20 years, and because I was also the head of student equity and we had some funding where it was relevant to use that for projects like this, I offered to provide some funding for a project officer to support a committee. She went to the school, they said great idea, let's form a committee. They did, and we had a cross section of the faculty in terms of senior administrators and educators, we had clinical people, we had people involved in simulation, stuff like that across the section. And for a bit over 12 months, we worked on firstly developing a means of articulating the inherent requirements so that they didn't just read like a list of competencies, that we actually, there are three key components which I think are essential to actually articulating inherent requirements. The first one is actually to describe what it is, but the second, and equally importantly, is to actually justify why it's inherent. And that process of looking at it and working through and trying to understand and explain why is this so essential, so fundamental that we can't do without it, that's very, very important. The third one that I see as equally important is to look at the characteristics of reasonable adjustments that it would enable a person to meet that inherent requirement. Not the specific reasonable adjustment like sign language interpreter or special equipment or technology, but the characteristics of it. The reason for that is that, one, it focuses people's attention on the inherent requirement is not an inherent requirement of the student. It's something that needs to be demonstrated, and there are adjustments that can be put in place, and it's our obligation to explore all the options for the adjustments before we can say, no, you can't meet it. And having that characteristics of reasonable adjustments reminds people that that is a key component in inherent requirements. Inherent requirements are a key component in determining what the reasonable adjustments are. So they're the three essentials, I think. The exemplars that we put in at Western Sydney was just as an explanation, trying to improve people's understanding. So after 15 iterations, we finally articulated them for nursing. At the same time, we were working with the Academic Senate. We'd set up a subcommittee from Academic Senate to look at the process of all the policies and whether there needed to be policy changes as well, looking at how it would fit across other courses and programs within the university. The Academic Senate made the decision that it would roll out inherent requirements across the whole of the university. They developed a priority list of programs where they felt articulating inherent requirements was very important because of the level of risk, and that was primarily around programs that had placements where I think as one nursing academic said to me, we can adjust for anything in the classroom. It's when they get out on placement that's when the problems really arise that we do need to address. We prioritised various programs and then set up a committee, basically Amanda Johnson, Kirrily Phillips, the program officer, and myself to drive the rollout across the rest of the university. And it all moved fairly quickly once we had the structure and the example of nursing. All the health-related fields rolled over very quickly. When we moved out into things like law, engineering, accounting, those sorts of things, you basically had to start over and work through a few of those processes again. But it was great. I've been in the field for quite a few years, and some people say I've made a few contributions over that time. But I think this is probably the single most important thing that I've done, because I see it as a vital tool for inclusion, but also a vital tool for ensuring that we maintain that academic integrity. It's our legal obligation. It's a key component of that process. We deal with it every day, but we haven't articulated it. So that places us in a level of risk of either not adjusting for a student or overcompensating. And both of those, I think, are significant risks.
So what What sustains your passion for inherent requirements, Trevor?
It
In the
works.
face of naysayers.
It works. I have seen transformations in academics. I've seen the benefits it had for my staff in simplifying that process of determining those reasonable adjustments, of not having those daily arguments with academics about what could or could not be adjusted for. It's also met my passion that I believe that students with disabilities should be given every opportunity. They should be given the chance to demonstrate their knowledge and skills. But at the end of the day, their degree has to be worth the same as everybody else's. And if we compromise on the inherent requirements, if we miss out on things because they're a little bit difficult, then really we're compromising the integrity of that student's degree and qualifications, but also everybody else's. Mine, yours, every other student who graduates from that program. And that, to me, is wrong. It devalues everybody, but mostly it devalues the achievements of students with disabilities. And I've seen some amazing achievements. And in my experience, it's been a tool for far more inclusion if it's done right. They have to be understood, and I think the process of actually coming to an understanding of what is inherent and why is a key to that understanding and using them appropriately. If you just cut and paste from somebody else and just change the name on top, sure, you'll have inherent requirements in place that you can refer to, but as you said, the danger is that people will use that as a tool for exclusion because they don't understand them. They don't understand that it's one factor in the process of determining reasonable adjustments. It's not the end point in itself. So that to me is vital. And I keep saying to people, the process is just as important as the outcome. And that understanding of the academics, of the disability practitioners, of the students is vital. I also believe that I'm a great advocate against any form of discrimination. And I think if we enrol a student in a course and we don't tell them up front what's going to be required, and they find 2 or 3 years down the track when they need invested huge amounts of time, money and themselves in trying to get there, we have already discriminated against them. We're placing them at a disadvantage. And to me, that's wrong. If somebody is required to do something, we should enable them to make an informed decision. And if we don't give them all the information, they can't make an informed decision. Also, it's a very important risk management tool for the university. Given the changes in the DDA in 2009, which shifted the burden of proof from the complainant to the respondent, places a much higher burden of proof on the university, and you have to be able to defend that. So you need a well-articulated decision trail to actually say why and how you came to that decision. Inherent requirements are a key tool in that process. It also requires us to be proactive in preventing discrimination occurring. So don't tell them what's going to come in the course. Well, that's not being proactive in preventing discrimination occurring. And not making appropriate adjustments because you don't know what's inherent is not being proactive. So I think that it's key in meeting those legal obligations, as well as our legal obligation to make whatever reasonable adjustments are appropriate. And it just works. It's transformational. I didn't have my 6 phone calls before morning tea from the nursing school complaining about some sort of adjustment that I used to get. When I did get a phone call, it was very proactive and constructive about how can we address this particular issue to see if we can get this student to meet the requirements, because they knew what they were. And yes, there were a couple of students that we did exclude, but it was appropriate because they couldn't meet the inherent requirements, and the students came to understand that. And we tried everything we possibly could to get them through, but it couldn't work. So where it was appropriate, and there was only a very few instances, yes, we counselled them into another course. But in the greatest instance, it was inclusive. It opened up things for students that had previously been closed to them. And that's why I think they're so great. That's why I'm so passionate about it.
Great. What do you think about parity between inherent requirements for same programs across different universities, and how we can achieve that?
Ideally, there would be parity, and there may be some internal differences because of different programs that people run. But given that a lot of the key programs are actually guided by some sort of external accreditation, I think there's a very big role for the external accreditors to actually be proactive in developing a set of inherent requirements that becomes part of the accreditation. And I know that we had discussions with APRA, Australian Association of Social Work, various medical boards, people like that at various times who were very interested in it, so that you could actually get some sort of standard that applied across all of the universities. As far as I know, that hasn't really progressed to the point where it becomes part of that accreditation process, but certainly where you've got similar courses, the same sort of accreditation, similar sorts of requirements, it would be appropriate that applies across the country as part of that accreditation process. And it would simplify the actual development of them. I still would like people to go through and think through the process of, yes, this is what they say, this is why it's inherent. Is it, was it, yeah, how did they arrive at that decision? Move on to the characteristics. Oh yeah, you could make that sort of adjustment. Yeah, that'd be, yeah, I can see how that would work. And going through that process, even if it is something mandated, just as with their curriculum, they go through that process of developing and articulating how they're going to respond to those external accreditation requirements. The accrediting body looks at their curriculum and say yay or nay, or change this or change that. It'd be the same thing, but it would be a good thing because everybody has to deal with them, whether they call them that, whether they recognise them or not. It is there every single day for every student with a disability, for every practitioner, for every academic, and literally for every student. Because if it doesn't apply to every student, it's not an inherent requirement. If you don't teach it, you don't assess it, it's not an inherent requirement. It's not an attribute of the student. It's something that needs to be demonstrated within the course. So, people need to get their heads around that. I've had instances where people have come in and said, okay, these are the sorts of students we require. No, you've got to say what the inherent requirements of your course are. Or this is for students with disabilities. No, it's for everybody. Students with disabilities may be the catalyst which prompted you to develop them because of the legal requirements, but they must apply to everybody. And those issues will come up with other students as well. The Muslim student in physiotherapy who can't wear a short sleeve polo shirt and shorts to go out and practice, who has issues around dealing with partially unclothed bodies of the opposite gender. How do you deal with those sorts of issues? The single parent with 2 kids who require after-school care, and how does she deal with a full-time placement? Those issues will come up with lots and lots of other students, and inherent requirements become a part of that process of decision making for all of your students. And academics know, and at the basis of it all, it's just bloody good teaching practice to know what you're really teaching, what you're expecting the students to learn, and why. And to me, that's fundamentally good teaching practice. And I've had academics come up to me after it's been in place for a while and say what a benefit it has been for their teaching practice. in terms of their decision making, in terms of how they can change their teaching and assessment practices, where the flexibility lies. Can they be more inclusive, and particularly with changes and things like online learning and things like that, where the technology is providing opportunities, and just simply replicating the lecture on the web is a fairly short-sighted way of going about it. What can you do? Can you have a variety of assessment tasks and techniques for all of your students? Can you make your course far more inclusive, far more flexible, far more appropriate? So the single mother with 2 kids and working part-time and studying part-time can do her reading and viewing of the information dissemination lecture material at 4 o'clock in the morning if that's the only time she can find. She doesn't have to be physically present in the lecture to get that information. Can they apply it in different ways? Is it essential that they do it the way we've always done? Nurses do not go on part-time clinicals. Well, yes, they can. There are part-time nurses out there. There's nothing inherent in being a nurse that requires you to work full-time, so why do you require them to do their placements full-time? The accreditation requirements just simply specify a certain number of hours. I think it's 800 hours. Doesn't say it's full-time. It says in a variety of situations. So, yeah, it has benefits all around. It is transformational. It saves so many conflicts and arguments and bad feelings. It simplifies the process. It's just a sheer clarity of it all for everybody. And the best time to do it is sitting around a table when you can work through these issues through in detail and justify it and argue it all out, rather than when the student needs the adjustments yesterday, trying to work out what you can adjust for and what is inherent and what isn't, and what can we change, what can't we, or sitting in a court of law defending why you discriminated against that student. Neither of which is a really good time to be actually working that out.